or Mr. Lincoln?
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. As they say, the cat got the tongue, but my questions again to the Premier is regarding the issue of cuts to daycare operators in New Brunswick of $2.4 million. 97% of the private government-regulated daycare owners are either owned by women or co-owned by women. The Minister of Education said yesterday that gender impact was considered. The Premier is the Minister responsible for women's equity. Is the Premier satisfied that the homework was done before the Premier and Cabinet made this decision to cut $2.4 million from private government-regulated daycare owners and operators?
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I appreciate the question, and I didn't realize that the opposition had their leadership convention, but it's great to see that they now have their leader, Mr. Speaker. I have to say and take complete issue with the line of questioning and the comments of the member opposite yesterday in the media. We've made it very clear, Mr. Speaker, that we are going to have a gender-based analysis incorporated to every single decision that we make as a government, Mr. Speaker, and we are doing that right now. And I'd like to tell you a little bit where that's at, Mr. Speaker. There has been a notice of intent that has been passed through our government, and a MEC is being prepared. In fact, Mr. Speaker, as we speak today, the Women Equality Branch is delivering training on how to do gender-based analysis to policy analysts across government today, Mr. Speaker, and I know what the opposition will say, and I'll thwart that right now. The session was scheduled about 3 weeks ago. So we are moving to ensure that gender-based analysis be mandatory in the decisions we make. In the interim, Mr. Speaker, we always consider what effect our decisions will have on women of our beautiful province, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, that actually wasn't what I was going to say. What I was going to say is, since you're developing a women's impact assessment model, gender equity, and since you're saying that this decision to cut $2.4 million from private government-regulated daycare operators, who 97% are owned or co-owned by women, Mr. Premier, will you then reverse this cut that detrimentally impacts the women of New Brunswick, the communities of New Brunswick, and put this on hold, reverse these cuts until you do your homework?
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I did not say any of the things that the member opposite would suggest that I said, Mr. Speaker. I'm making it very clear that the gender-based analysis will be mandatory within the decisions made by government. However, that wasn't the case before of the previous government, Mr. Speaker, despite the fact that when they were in government, Mr. Speaker, including the member opposite when he was a minister, it was in the throne speech in November of 2013 that a gender-based analysis would be incorporated. However, Mr. Speaker, fast forward to October 2014, it wasn't incorporated into the decision-making process, Mr. Speaker, within government. So the past government failed to do that. But don't worry, Mr. Speaker, we take this very seriously, and we are creating that process and making sure that it will be mandatory and not voluntary like the previous government wanted. Now, in the interim, we have always looked at what effects our decisions will have on the most vulnerable, on people, on the economy, Mr. Speaker, and on the women of this beautiful province. We will continue to do that in the interim until we have the mandatory process that will include a gender-based analysis, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, it's very clear that the Premier has not done his homework on this file. Can he agree that 97% of private daycare owner-operators are women? Can he agree that this sector has made too many strides forward? Can he agree that this will have a negative impact on women and families and children, cutting $2.4 million to private daycare operators that will divide private and nonprofit, that will divide owner-operators and workers? Mr. Speaker, can he agree that this will have a detrimental impact on the jobs and on the women of the province of New Brunswick and on families?
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Education has made it very clear that there is no cut. In fact, we are increasing it by $400,000. So it is going from $2.4 million, Mr. Speaker, to $2.8 million. So I think it's very important that we make it very clear that there is no cut, despite the fact that the member opposite keeps repeating that there is, Mr. Speaker. So I want to make it very clear again that even if this is a predominantly women industry, or led industry, I should say, Mr. Speaker, we have considered what impact this decision would have, and we're happy that we're giving more money to jobs that are done predominantly by women, Mr. Speaker. We will continue to always consider what impacts our decisions have on our economy, on job creation, on the most vulnerable, and on women in this province, Mr. Speaker. We will make sure it's a formal process, and we will get it done, something the last government didn't, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Lincoln.
Mr. Speaker, what's so offensive is that this Premier and this government has no clue what they're doing. In fact, Mr. Speaker, everything they're touching gets messed up and mixed up. In fact, the Premier is wrong again. He says we're going from 2.8 million to 2.4 million to 2.8 million. He's wrong. He's wrong on the facts. He doesn't know. This is a $20 million program that is being cut at the private daycare operators of 2.4 million. On the same hand, you're doing a cut and a shuffle. You're moving 2.8 over to educators who are predominantly women. So, Mr. Speaker, they've got to know the facts. Yes, this is a cut and shuffle, as the Minister of Education has said. And are you then happy that no one gets a raise and that you're taking money from private daycare owners and operators and giving the money to more workers? But what's the point of giving this more money to workers if those private daycare operators are going to close? What is the point of giving more money to workers if private daycare operators are going to close? Because
the Honourable Minister of Education. Honourable Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, certainly there are numbers that are wrong. We're not talking about $20 million in this case. We're talking about a budget that last year was $23.2 million, and we're bringing it up to $23.6 million, an addition of $400,000. And Mr. Speaker, all these new employees are generally women who would normally be getting nothing more than minimum wage. And I want to repeat that. These are going to be women who will be hired and continue to have a decent wage thanks to this program, thanks to this increase of $400,000. But this is because there will be $2.8 million for those who will be employed. And yes, the employees of New Brunswick received a raise because the minimum wage went from $10 to $10.30.
No, Mr. Speaker, the minister's wrong again. There was no raises given to these workers. A cut of $2.4 million takes money from the private government-regulated operators who spend 75% of their time with children and gives it to new workers at new daycares yet to open. We agree on that. But what you should be doing is fighting for more money to the program in this regard. Instead, you're taking the money away from private daycare owner-operators who are spending 75% of their time with children. What is the point? What is the point of taking this money away from existing private daycare operators and giving it to new workers and new daycares yet to open and force these private daycare operators to close and then lose jobs? It's mixed up and messed up. Will you reverse this decision and do it right and put this on hold?
Honourable Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, once again, all the provinces, employees in the province saw the minimum wage go up from $10 to $10.30, and will continue to give $5 to the trainers and teachers, those who work in the daycares who have the training, and $3.07 to those who don't have the training. Also, Mr. Speaker, I want to say that the $2.8 million that we're talking about will allow to have a great number of employees who will be able to offer quality care and quality learning experiences to our young people, our future. So contrary to what the opposition member says, we are progressing, and we will have more people in the sector because we need to increase the number of daycares in the province.
Mr. Speaker, you won't have more children and more people in the system if you're going to cut the private daycare operators and they're going to be forced to close. Simply put, setting this industry back 20 years. Because 20 years we've been working in this province to have a unified, cohesive, coordinated early childhood sector. Now, because of the Premier's decision to cut 2.4 out of the private daycare operators' wage subsidy, it's going to divide this sector, it's going to split the owner-operators and workers, and it's going to set us back. We're going to lose jobs, and these operators, some of them, will be forced to go unlicensed. Can the minister tell us how many of these operators are planning to go to an unlicensed, unregulated system because of this cut?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Monsieur le Président,
Mr. Speaker, the fearmongers are still at work, and I want to let the people know, and the people in this House know, that the $2.8 million that we're adding is to create new places, because we're going to have new staff. The $2.8 million will allow to recruit and retain staff, and will allow us to have a better system, Mr. Speaker. As well, yes, only the owners of private daycares are affected, and we have to distinguish between those people and the rest of the staff. The rest of staff are kept at a they are simply employees, whereas they, as business people, can look for other means of revenue, Mr. Speaker.
Understand, again, those people he's referring to, 97% are women entrepreneurs who've gotten the training, they have a passion for children, providing a service in the community, and 75% of their time is working on the floor with children, with their employees. In addition to that, they're spending nights and weekends running their small business. Mr. Speaker, how then does this cut and taking from Peter to pay Paul going to benefit this sector when you promised that you would double subsidies? In fact, you're making the situation worse. Can you please understand that you're making this worse? Can the minister tell us what's the average profit of daycare operators? He says this cut is happening because these daycare operators are making a profit, are making money. Can the minister tell us what the average profit of one of these private, government-regulated daycare operators is?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Monsieur le Président,
Mr. Speaker, I am proud to see that the member opposite is making progress. At least he's recognizing that we're talking about redistribution of funds rather than eliminating funds. He can talk all he wants about taking things from Peter to just Paul, but at least he has admitted that the memo he prepared and that he had sent to all the parents in this province, that memo is mistaken. The memo talks about a reduction of $2.4 million, but there was no reduction of $2.4 million. There was, in this case, an increase of $400,000. And as I said, this was for employed staff at $2.8 million, which will allow, once again, to recruit and retain qualified staff to have a promising future for our young people.
The member for Ormoc-Lincoln.
Mr. Speaker, they can be happy. They can be happy, proud, and give standing ovations in their decision to cut $2.4 million from daycare operators. That is the truth, Mr. Speaker, and they have no idea the impact and how this decision is setting the industry back 20 years. They've not done their homework. They've not done an impact assessment for women and gender equity. It goes against their platform. $2.4 million cut to operators goes against their priority for jobs. It goes against them making evidence-based decisions. It goes against their priority for consultation. Mr. Premier, can't you agree that this cut is a mistake and needs to be reversed for all of these reasons?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, I have a lot of respect for all the staff of our daycare system in the province. I believe that these people deserve better than to suffer from the fear-mongering that the people opposite are doing. I think we have to recognize that I don't think we have to look at the I don't know where the member opposite has gotten his facts, but what I can say is that there has been an increase in the sector thanks to the current program, and this increase is due to this program, and that we are going to continue to invest in this program, Mr. Speaker. And I would add that when we talk about different daycares in the province, the growth is important, and this amount will allow us to continue with that growth and offer to staff an adequate salary